So our first slide, we talk about when Comhaltas decided to treat this particular subject with any sense of urgency and stuff like that. So what we have here on our first slide is the timeline. And you can see there that we started sometime around the mid-1990s, between 1990 and 95. We began to create an awareness of child protection in Comhaltas. In 1995, we published a document, and the title was Recommendations / Suggestions in Respect of Branch Involvement with Children and Young People. In 2007, we published, we're after going very quickly now, I'm after skipping something here. There we go. In 2007, we published the first child protection policy document, and that was updated in 2008. And then in 2008, we also sent copies of that to each branch, and we requested branches that they would either adopt this particular national policy or design their own policy. And most DLPs have been involved in this over the years. And then branches were further requested to appoint a DLP, a designated liaison person. Now, that is at the request of Children First document, which is part of the whole safeguarding procedure. So all branches, we requested that they would appoint a DLP, not elect them, because there was under a lot of pressure at the time to establish an election procedure for that. But I felt that it wasn't a position that we would probably get the best people on an election on that one. So we stuck with the principle of appointing a DLP at branch level, and all branches, at most of them at least at this stage, would have done that. And then we requested branches to distribute copies of their policy to relevant people in the branch, like officers and teachers and people in the branch who would have what we call frequent access to children and vulnerable adults. So in 2008, we began a rollout of child protection seminars in regions and counties. And I think the very first one I did in 2008 was in the province of Connacht. And would you believe I had in excess of 100 people attending for that particular conference. And then I did another one in County Kerry alone, and I had 87 or 88 people attending that very soon after that in 2008. And then we had a number of those seminars in regions and counties at various times since 2008, right up to the time that pandemic set in, and that stopped us in our gallop, as you can imagine. So it's great, it's a wonderful opportunity that I can share these with everybody tonight as well. In 2021, that's last year, we updated our child protection policy, and it was circulated to branches, and it's also available as a download document on comhaltas.ie. And again, just going back a little bit then to the next important element of child protection, which is Garda vetting. So in relation to that, we approached the Garda vetting unit in Thurles at the time. It is now called the National NVB, the National Vetting Bureau. It was that time it was called the Garda vetting unit in 2010, and we requested that we would be part of a number of organisations who would have a responsibility and be assisted by the Garda vetting unit in getting our personnel vetted. And that came through after about a year. There was a lot of documentation had to be filled out on that one. But in January of 2011, we got a registration with the Garda vetting unit. And since 2011, we have been vetting Comhaltas personnel, principally people who provide a service to children. Now, under the guidelines of vetting, they use a phrase, providing a relevant service. And the relevant service that we're talking about really are teaching, organization of classes, supervision, and organizing events for children and vulnerable adults. So, and people having a presence at those, and those are the only people that need to be vetted. And we'll talk a little bit later about who needs vetting and who doesn't, okay? So our current status then in relation to child protection would tick 4 important boxes, and they are listed here as branch policy, a branch DLP in place. that we follow Garda vetting and we do training seminars. Now, a couple of general points in relation to child safeguarding or protection, and I had them here just in bullet points. The importance of child protection in Comhaltas branches cannot be overstated. I think that there's a word that is used again under Children First, and they said the safeguarding and protection of children is paramount and comes first over anything else you do in the branch. You can do music classes, you can do concerts, you can do everything else, provided that you have some elements of child protection and safeguarding in place. We have asked all branches, particularly at their AGMs, to adopt a child protection policy and make a note of that in their branch minutes as well. In other words, that it would be noted in the minutes that the branch has a child protection policy in place. We also requested that all branches would appoint a DLP, designated liaison person. We asked that some elements of training would be undertaken by the DLP, either through Comhaltas or through other organisations, or online as well. They'll talk about a little bit about those later on. And we also hope that all officers and elected people in branches and officers of all units, branches, county boards and provincial councils and national level would promote child protection and awareness in our units on the whole area. And the last part there is the importance of Garda vetting as it is rolled out. Now, in relation to the DLP, and I'm thinking that this evening I'm probably talking to a lot of DLPs representing branches. And a couple of points in relation to that would be the elements of effective training should include, it should have an inclusion for different disciplines and agencies. In other words, that there would be a knowledge and an awareness that the HSE and TUSLA and An Garda Síochána would be two other agencies apart from Comhaltas Ceoltóirí Éireann who have a responsibility in relation to child protection. A focus on child protection and welfare legislation and policy, in other words, a little bit of reading up on that doesn't go astray for DLPs, and there's lots of available of reading material online as well under the HSE website and TUSLA website, etc. Dissemination of knowledge about child abuse, including physical and behavioural signs, effects and appropriate intervention. We'll talk later about the particular elements of child abuse as noted under Children First. Focus on interprofessional and interagency work alone with the roles of individuals and organisations. In other words, that if issues needed to be addressed within a Comhaltas unit, that there is interprofessional, interagency people able to assist and help as well. And finally, dissemination of information about local services, where to go for addresses and methods of referral if need be. In other words, that you would have the details locally of a person or a phone number for TUSLA agencies or child protection issues available if you require them. The context in which all of this happens is outlined in a document called Children First, or the subtitle National Guidelines for the Protection and Welfare of Children, first produced in 1999, and the last one I think was in 2017. The role played by the HSE in all of this, under TUSLA now we talk about, the role of An Garda Síochána and the role of Comhaltas, because we are part of the structure as well. This is an important statement here. There was a joint protocol agreed between the HSE and An Garda Síochána. And I read what it says. A joint protocol has been agreed between both bodies whereby each organisation will notify the other of all reports of suspected child abuse which are made to them, and they are obliged to conduct a preliminary assessment, investigation and consultation with each other. Now, Comhaltas is not asked to conduct any investigation. I'll talk a bit more detail on that later on. But those two bodies, An Garda Síochána and the HSE, are charged with investigation and an assessment of what's happening. And that's under the Children First guidelines, which were published in the last one updated in 2017. So what is the role of Comhaltas in all of this? And this is a statement from Children First guidelines. It's there in red. It says all organisations, whether statutory or voluntary, have an overall corporate responsibility to safeguard children. Very short statement, but it states very distinctly there that we have a responsibility. If we deal with children, we have an allied responsibility to take care of them as well. So we have a safe and clearly defined method of selecting volunteers and people who provide a service to us, like teachers. Now, the defined method of selection of volunteers and teachers has to do with gather vetting. So that is a great way of making sure that the people that we ask to provide the service, that we have an outside agency to be able to do a vetting on them and to give us some relevant peace of mind in relation to asking them to do a job. We should develop effective procedures for reporting and management of concerns, and that's the duty of the DLP, that they would know exactly how to manage any concern that comes across their desk. They don't investigate, but they should know where to go and who to talk to at the next stage. So we have to identify a DLP to act as a liaison with the HSE and the Garda Síochána on behalf of the Comhaltas branch and the members as well. Some of the principles of best practice in child protection, and I took these principles straight from the document Children First. The first one there is probably the most important of all, and I spoke about it a little bit earlier. It says the welfare of children is of paramount importance, and note that word paramount. It is the first. It's more important than anything else that we do. It's of paramount importance that we look after the children in our care, whatever short time they're in our care, maybe once a week or once a fortnight, or at a local class or something of that nature. Okay. We must recognize that there is a balance between protecting children and also respecting the rights of parents and carers. So we take that on board as well and give it due thought. We also have to understand that children do have a right to be heard and taken seriously. Now, some of us who maybe are of my ilk and my age would probably have a very different understanding that maybe children were told to be quiet and not to intervene in an adult conversation. In other words, if you were at home, it's none of your business, keep quiet. But look, if a child has something to say, they should be taken seriously. And for a long time, I suppose, this was the problem in most countries in the world, that children who had a concern or who were being abused in some fashion or other didn't know what to do. And if they spoke about it, they probably felt that they wouldn't be taken seriously either. If we do have a concern about anybody in our care, early intervention and support should be available, and we should know where to go for that. And parents and carers have also the right to be respected and to respect their responsibilities in it as well. Now, when social workers come into the picture, and if they find that parents are neglectful of their duty, that's becoming a serious matter. But that's not for us to investigate or to make an assessment of. That's for the TUSLA and the Garda Síochána. Now, I have a title here called Principles of Best Practice in Child Protection, and these are fairly self-explanatory, so we'll read down through them. Actions taken to protect a child should consider the overall needs of the child. Intervention should not deal with the child in isolation. In other words, they should talk to the family of the person involved. Now, these are general principles, and they don't specifically apply to the work of the DLP, but it's important that the DLP understands that these principles are very important. The criminal dimension of any action cannot be ignored if there is a suspect criminal action involved. Children should only be separated from parents when all other avenues are exhausted. This is a matter for TUSLA and the HSE and social workers. Effective prevention, detection, and treatment require coordinated, multidisciplinary approach. Now, in the old days, maybe the HSE, before TUSLA was part of the structure, probably were dealing with those singularly on their own and didn't bother talking to the Gardaí. And likewise, if the Garda Síochána were concerned about issues, they probably didn't talk to the HSE either. But now they have a protocol in place and they know that they have to work hand in hand. Effective child protection requires training and clarity of responsibility for personnel of organizations involved. Now we talk about these particular bullet points here, particularly the first four. These are areas of concern in relation to child abuse. Now, there are four main areas of child abuse as decided under Children First document. The first one is called neglect. I'll speak a little bit about each one of them in a moment. We'll just go through the list. The second one is emotional abuse. The third one is called physical abuse. And the fourth one is sexual abuse. Okay. We'll talk about guidelines and creating awareness and gather vetting on those, but I'll go straight into a definition of each one of them. Now, these definitions of their nature are very, very short, but if you look very carefully at each definition, they're absolutely, they cover possibly everything. Now, we have used those definitions as part of our child protection policy document as well, so they're included in that. So let's look at what neglect is defined as. It's an omission where the child suffers significant harm or impairment of development by being deprived of food, clothing, warmth, hygiene, intellectual stimulation, supervision and safety, attachment to and affection from adults, and medical care. Now, even though it's very, very short definition, everything is covered there. Now, you can get a much more detailed definition in the Children First document. And by the way, you can get those Children First documents as downloads from the HSE website, no problem. Let's look at the next one, emotional abuse. And the definition that we have for that is when a child's need for affection, approval, consistency, and security are not met. Emotional abuse is normally to be found in the relationship between a caregiver and a child. In other words, between somebody, a senior member of the family, and the child within the family itself. Physical abuse. A definition says any form of non-accidental injury. Now, those hyphenated words there, non-accidental and injury, or injuries which result from willful or neglected failure to protect a child. Now, everybody knows that children of their nature taking part in sporting activities and stuff of that nature often have injuries, but you should be very, very careful about deciding whether that would be a physical abuse injury or not. We'll talk a little bit later about how to observe these issues in dealing with children under your care, as into classes and stuff of that nature. And finally, the fourth area of abuse is under sexual abuse. And it says, when a child is used by another person for his or her gratification or sexual arousal or that of others. And it's again a very short one, but it cuts straight to the point and it covers everything. So now here's where people looking after children at a local branch of music class or whatever, how can a child or child abuse come to your attention? And there are various different ways of observing that. The first one is called direct disclosure, and that simply means that some child will come to you and say that they have been abused in some fashion or other, or tell you a story that you need to listen carefully to. The second one is a direct observation if you did witness some abusive situation happening. The third one is somebody from a third party comes to you and says, look, I'd like to share something with you. The fourth one is observation of an injury. Now, I mentioned earlier on accidental injury. We ruled that out. But if it's an injury that is a persistent, not healing injury and is persistently there over a period of time, that might raise a red flag with somebody and says, look, I'm not sure whether this child needs to attend a medical doctor or hospital or whatever else, and if that injury could point out to some sort of physical abuse going on. Aspects of a child's behavior. In other words, this teachers in their nature, particularly teachers in schools and stuff like that, would be very much aware of any changes in children's behavior over a period of time. And they might be absolutely very outgoing when you meet them first of all, and then they withdraw into themselves maybe for some reason or other. And you should keep that in mind as well, that this might indicate there's something going on that needs to be looked at. And then the last one here on our slide says consistent signs of neglect over a period of time. And again, it's like the observation of an injury. And if you see consistent signs of neglect, it could be, for example, that somebody, maybe their clothing over a period of time that doesn't get changed, if they don't get showered, if for example, you would maybe observe that they're losing weight or something of that nature. Now, these are just general ones, and these are the things to be aware of. So every GLP would be aware of those issues, and that the people providing the service to the children in a music class or whatever, they should be aware of those things as well. So supposing you did what we get, a story was told to you, we call it a disclosure. Somebody says something. Here's the recommendation. Do the following things. Stay calm, listen to them, accept what they say, reassure them, record what they say in writing, report what you have written down, and record your report. Now, I'll just read those again and talk a little bit about them. So if somebody comes to you with a story that needs to be a concern or a red flag or something like that, and they tell you what's going on, you stay calm and listen very carefully. And I'll have the don'ts in a moment now, but these are the do's. These are the positive things. In other words, you don't open your mouth at all. You just listen carefully. You accept what they say at face value. You don't go investigate. You reassure them if they need to be reassured that something will be done about it. Then you do the recording. You write down what they said. You report what they said to TUSLA, because there are special forms that need to be filled out in those instances. And then you record in your report that you have sent it to TUSLA, dated and timed, etc., etc. So in other words, you have the evidence. And the reason that you have that evidence is if TUSLA has made an assessment of it, and if they think that it needs a further investigation, then they will come back to you about that, and you need the evidence. Now, these are the things that you don't do. Don't panic. Don't promise to keep secrets. Don't ask any leading questions. Don't make the child repeat the story unnecessary. Remember this, if a child comes to tell you something, they may be absolutely scared that you won't believe them, and there's no point in asking them to repeat. And please don't delay. You know what to do. Start the process. And if there is a concern that needs to be an assessment or investigated, then you know that you don't do the investigation, that TUSLA do the investigation, or if it is very urgent, that An Garda Síochána would do it. Okay? So again, those, don't panic, don't promise to keep secrets, don't ask leading questions, don't make the child repeat the story unnecessarily, and don't delay. Start the process. Okay? So here are a couple of questions that you might be wondering about. Why children don't tell? There are various reasons, and I have listed them here. First of all, the first one says it could be the fear of the person who is abusing them. It could be the fear of what's going to happen if I do say it, if I tell this story. The fear of being disbelieved, so nobody would believe me. It's a tale out of school, so to speak. The person is feeling guilty. The child is feeling guilty. They don't have enough language to actually talk about their feelings. The subject is taboo in their eyes because maybe they have been listening to some adults and they have said, you don't talk about those things. The abuse has been normalized. In other words, that has been going on for a long period of time. And they feel that this is a normal thing that's happening to them and everybody else of their own age group. And finally, there are some bribes going on at the background to make sure that they don't speak. So those are very important issues. So now we leave that for the moment, and I'll come back later on with some other guidelines in relation to all of that, okay? But going back again now, it is a little bit disjointed here now. We're talking about the DLP and the designated liaison person. So we're talking about what type of person we should have as a DLP, and I'm not trying to make an assessment of all you good people who are already doing the job of DLP, but obviously a DLP should be a trusted member of the organization, a trusted member of society. the DLP should have a knowledge of what we do as an organisation in Comhaltas. They should be aware of what we do. They should be familiar with the topic of abuse and have done a little bit of research on it. And of course, they should be comfortable with the subject matter. And that was one of the reasons why initially we decided that the DLP would be appointed by a branch, not elected. And we felt that the appointment would give you a better scope of asking somebody whom you would trust that they would be knowledgeable, they would have enough knowledge of what's happening. And in many cases, it transpires that it might be somebody who is already working as a DLP in another structure, perhaps in a local school or something of that nature. So a lot of teachers are very good on that. Every school has a DLP and a deputy DLP. Usually it's the principal and deputy principal. So that's important. So what are the responsibilities that come with the job? And you don't get paid for this one either. Well, the Comhaltas branch should have a clear written policy and procedures, and that should be as a priority in branches. And I tell you the reason for that. Supposing, for example, that an incident did occur within the branch that needed to be investigated by Cisteoir or an Garda Síochána, I guarantee to you that the first port of call, they would ask you, I need to see some documentation that you have in relation to. And the first port of call would be, they say, do you have a policy document and do you have clear guidelines and procedures written down? So there you go. The second one, that the DLP should know who to report to within the outside agencies. Who is responsible for handling complaints or concerns? And how do you pass on a concern to another agency? Now, these are important ones, and there's a lot of guidance on those under Children First as well. What are my professional responsibilities as a DLP? And again, I might be repeating myself in some of these points here that we have mentioned already, so you'll forgive me for that. To be alert to the possibility that the children that you come into contact may be subject to abuse. Now, that's a straightforward statement that we can't discount that. They may be being abused at some stage. We have to consider that and be alert to that possibility. The second one, a responsibility to keep yourself informed about child protection and welfare by availing of some elements of training. To report concerns about child abuse or welfare to the HSE, Cisteoir and Garda Síochána, and how to do that. There are certain forms involved. So you should know your role to implement and promote the unit child protection policy and procedures internally within the branch and among the branch members. To act as the main contact for child protection within the branch. To provide information and advice on child protection for the branch membership. And every DLP's detail, their name, their address, their phone number should be available to all senior members of the branch, particularly those who provide a service to children. And that should be a sort of an automatic thing at the AGM every year. Now, Tomas is the DLP, and here is Tomas's phone, and here is Tomas's email, and here is Tomas's address, and here's how you can contact him, or Mary, or whoever it is, okay? And that goes without saying that all that information should be relevant and made available as early as possible in each year of Comhaltas, particularly at the AGM time, usually September, October. Another role of the DLP would be to create awareness of the importance of child protection among the branch members. In other words, that the DLP would occasionally talk maybe to the other officers, to the Rúnaí particularly, in relation to issues on child protection, and make sure that everybody is vetted, okay? To keep abreast of developments and understand the most recent information. And that happens occasionally every couple of years. The Children First document is updated, and that's the Bible, in fact, in relation to child protection. So you don't have to go for too much research to get that one, okay? So to keep abreast of developments and understand the most recent information on related issues, like, for example, data protection, confidentiality, legal matters, and otherwise that impact on child protection. To encourage good practices, support of the procedures involved, to maintain confidential records of reported cases and action taken. In other words, that the records that you write down, or the details that you write down, if you ever have to do it, that there's a confidentiality involved in that as well. And they may need to be brought into the picture if, for example, TUSLA or the Garda Síochána are going to do an investigation or an assessment of what's going on. And that brings me to the next one, to liaise with the statutory agencies and ensure that they have access to all necessary information, and to regularly monitor and review the branch policy and procedures. In other words, the GLP every year should have a look at the branch policy and any written local procedures that are written in. Now, for example, 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, we asked all branches to carry out a risk assessment in relation to child protection issues. And what that entailed was each particular branch would look at where their classes are convened, where their classes are held, look at the actual building, look at the structure they have in place of safety and procedures and stuff like that in relation to opening up the place, closing it, who does it, and stuff of that nature, in relation to general security and general safety, as well as child safety as well. So these are important issues, and they should be those should be reviewed on an annual basis to make sure that you are up to speed on it as well. Now, a little bit about training, and this is an interesting one. Now here, this is the HSE has developed what they call an e-learning program. It's called An Introduction to Children First. And the program has been developed and is approved by the HSE, the Department of Health, and interdepartmental oversight group of Irish government. And it is available through HSE Learning and Development website. It is a class about 1.5 hours, and you can be issued with a certificate of successful completion of the program. Now, a lot of you may have already done that, and congratulations if you have. What does it cover? It covers the following 4 points. It covers personal, legal, and organizational responsibilities in relation to protecting children and reporting a concern about child welfare or abuse. It covers recognizing a child protection or a welfare concern. It covers responding appropriately to a child protection or welfare concern. And it covers reporting a child protection or welfare concern. Now, I have touched on all of those issues at some of the comments I made at an earlier period. So I would ask everybody to go through that particular 1.5 hour online, do that one for your own support and comfort as well, in many cases that you can do that. Now, this is a very important statement at the top of this slide, and it's in red for a reason. It is not appropriate for the Comhaltas DLP or Comhaltas branch officers to carry out assessments. You only report what you know. And I stated that a number of times. You don't have that responsibility. And I suppose we can thank our lucky stars we don't, because we are not equipped to be investigative people. So the responsibility for all assessment or investigation of child abuse cases, whether they're factual or suspected or otherwise, that rests with the HSE and on Garda Síochána, and they are charged with doing that. And they're also charged with the responsibility for managing and coordinating those cases as well, and the HSE are responsible for that. Now, this is a very important statement that was carried out in 1998. It was called Protection for Persons Reporting Child Abuse Acts. Now, and I'll just give you a little bit of background on this. If you look at the date 1998, I remember I was teaching at the time in a school, and I was a member of our teachers union, the Irish National Teachers Organisation, and I would often attend our INTO meetings. And invariably at that particular time in the 1990s, when DLPs were not in position or in place, and policy documents were not available, etc., etc., this particular issue was often raised at union meetings. What type of protection do teachers have if they have to report a concern in relation to child abuse? And nobody could give us proper answer at that time. So since then, in 1998, an act was passed by the government called Protection for Persons Reporting Child Abuse Act 1998. And the act was passed on the 23rd of January 1999. And the main provisions of the act are as follows. And it's an important act. The provision of immunity from civil liability for any person who reports child abuse, quote, reasonably and in good faith, to designated officers of the HSE or an Garda Síochána. And that's a very important step. In other words, to talk about it in layman's language, you should not be charged with a criminal offence if you report an abuse situation to the HSE or an Garda Síochána. You should be free from civil liability, and there is a certain immunity that goes with it. Now, since COVID came in, we're all talking about immunity from virus, but there's an immunity here as well in relation to any reporting that a person does. And it's not, it's all adults have a responsibility to report if they need to do that. Part of the act also included the following: the creation of a new offence of false reporting of child abuse, where a person makes a report knowing that the statement is false. And that, thankfully, is included in it as well. In other words, what we're saying there is that somebody deliberately falsifies a statement and brings that statement and alleges falsely, and you know it is false, and you make an allegation against a person that they are an abuser, that is a criminal act in itself. So that's very important. And the third one is, in quotation, a person shall not be liable in damages in respect of the communication, whether in writing or otherwise, by him or by her, to an appropriate person, of his or her opinion that a child has been or is being assaulted, ill-treated, neglected, or sexually abused, or a child's health, development, or welfare has been or is being avoidably impaired or neglected, unless it is proved that he or she has not acted reasonably and in good faith in forming that opinion and communicating it to the appropriate person. Now, I'll go back and just at the previous page, and you'll see the second bullet point there: a person shall not be liable in damages in respect of making a communication. In other words, if you have a reason to bring a concern to either the HSE, TUSLA, or the Garda Síochána, that you shall not be liable in damages or brought suit for damages in relation to that. So that's important. So what's the reporting procedure looks like? Very straightforward. If you have a concern or a suspicion, you must inform, consult with the HSE, usually the duty social worker, or if it is fairly urgent, with an Garda Síochána. And then that's followed up by a written report to the HSE. It's a standard report form that is available on Children First document. I think most branches would have maybe a copy of it somewhere as well. And that has to be written and in a proper fashion. And the HSE will assist the person making that report. They'll assist them in writing up that report if needs be. Now, the heading here is good practice, okay? So policies and practices for creating an environment for children that is safe and child-centered. Here's what we should be looking at all the time. We should have our mission statement. We should have a recognition and respect for the rights of children. A lot of these now, you've heard them already this evening. We recognize that the welfare of children is paramount. There we go again with that nice word. We should have some recruitment procedures in place, and that is only carried out through Garda vetting. Okay? If we need somebody to teach a class, we have to make sure that they have a vetting, because it's now mandatory since 2016. And we should not ask anybody to provide a service to children within our branch unless we are satisfied that we have the documentation from what is called a disclosure document. I'll speak about that a little bit later. And then we have induction and continuing training. And even tonight now is part of that as well. And we have a Comhaltas branch child protection policy in place. We have clear procedures outlined when working with children. We talk about proper structures in class and transport. We'll talk about those in a moment because I have a couple of recommended bullet points for you as well. All members should be aware of the policy and guidelines that we have. We should have a designated liaison person known to the members. We should adhere to best practice, create good relations with parents and guardians. By the way, in relation to parents and guardians of the children we provide a service to, I'm always recommending that in September, when we have our ducks in a row, and we have our policy document as well as that, and we have gather vetting done, that we inform the parents and their guardians that Tomás is the DLP of the branch, that we have a policy document and it's available for anybody who wants to read it or have sight of it, and that we have all our personnel providing a service have been gather vetted. And that is very good information passing from us, from the branch to the parents and the guardians. Don't leave them in the blind, that if something happens, they come back and they said, you never told me. And then we have the last two there, abide by branch code of conduct, which I'm going to show you very, very shortly. And we create a culture of openness and respect at all times. As I said earlier on, under our Cothromaíocht, that we have that culture of respect. So how to protect yourself? You follow good practice. And again, you document and write up details all the time if you need to take notes. If an incident happens, for example, in a class and a teacher wants to make a note of it, they should be advised that certainly make a note of that. Whether it becomes a relevant concern later on is immaterial. Make a note of it for the time being. In fact, I would recommend that each class teacher would have some sort of an incident book that they would write stuff in. It might be something to do with a row that occurs in the class between two children. You may not know what is going on prior to it, but there may be a follow-up on it afterwards. And if a parent needs to follow up, they may come back to you and they say, by the way, you never told me about that. And you can say, well, I have it written down and I'll tell you the details that happened, okay? Keep records accurate, and keep them short. Time them, date them, that sort of thing. In other words, the record has to have a certain amount of factual information in them. Be clear on what procedures are involved in the whole area of child protection, and be clear of your own role as well, and seek supervision and advice from other people if you're unsure. My email is always available to you, Tomás@comhaltas.ie, if you ever want to raise an issue. People ring me up with issues as well, and my phone number is 087 2029 087 2029 or Tomás@comhaltas.ie. At this stage, can I also say that even though I am the liaison person with the Garda vetting, we have a deputy liaison person as well, in the person of Magella Bartley, no less. So Magella also has undergone an element of training in relation to this as well. So we have a good structure in place. How to protect yourself? Like you're doing tonight, you're attending some sort of training, networking stuff going on. And the two last points are very important, and I should remind myself of those sometimes, to recognize any stress and take time off. Now, here's our code of practice, and this code of practice is included in our policy document. The following guidance includes a variety of contexts in which Comhaltas members carry out their activities. The code of practice is to safeguard the welfare of young children, vulnerable adults in our charge, and to ensure that safe and sensible structures will continue to be taken to ensure the safety of young people, officers, members, and volunteers. A Comhaltas code of practice in relation to branch classes and activities, and I have a couple of bullet points that maybe would be a good guideline. All branches should be responsible for the appointment of teachers and tutors. Don't just leave it to the local teacher to set up a structure. The branch must take a responsibility in this, and particularly the elected officers of the branch, under the guidance that we provide to them. Ensure that two branch adults, preferably one male and one female, or an adult tutor on one other adult, arrive together to open the venue. We always back up our services with two working together, or three maybe, rather than one. if one person is always responsible for opening and closing, they may be open to certain allegations at some stage. So don't allow that to happen. And that's why we recommend that. Arrange seating appropriately for both the tutor and pupil with respect to physical proximity. Now, the guidance that we provide for teachers, for example, in relation to delivery of their classes would be that you would reduce the amount of physical proximity to an absolute minimum in case that some allegation is made for an inappropriate touch. Okay? Now, you can't avoid it when you're teaching the fiddle or when you're teaching the tin whistle to small children, but be very careful of it and be cognizant of it at all times, okay? So that you make sure that, and I would always recommending that the tutor or the teacher would be facing the children most of the time, 99% of the time, that you're talking behind a table or something for them and you're teaching them from that perspective. Where a tutor is dealing with an individual pupil, ensure that another adult, preferably a branch adult, is in close vicinity and is aware of the fact as well. It is necessary for a tutor to report inappropriate behavior to a branch officer and to the DLP. If a tutor notices something going on, they should report that. Make a note of it as well. Trust your intuition if a pupil is acting inappropriately and take action. That is, share your concerns with the DLP and implement measures to reduce any risk. Use verbal affirmation to praise rather than physical touch. That is put in there just again to make sure that it wouldn't be misconstrued if you put your hand on somebody's head or their back or whatever, and that could be misunderstood. So you use a verbal affirmation. Now, you played that very well, Mary, and that was good. And can you go back on the first bar of that tune again, and we'll improve it a bit. That sort of stuff. Okay. Never use physical forms of discipline. That's gone by the board a long time. Tutors and parents should be made aware of the class timetable. In other words, for the general security now I'm talking about here, as well as everything else, that in other words, that children are dropped off to class and that they're picked up at an appropriate time. In other words, that parents are aware of the actual timetable for those kids. Ensure that after class, all children are collected promptly and 2 branch adults, preferably one male and one female, or a tutor and one other adult, are present to lock up the venue. Okay. I remember once upon a time, it's about 5 years ago, I had the job of opening and closing with another teacher, and everybody had gone and I was locking up, and suddenly I noticed a light on in a I think it was in the bathroom area of the school we were in. And I said, that light shouldn't be on. So I had to open and go back in again. And there was a child in the bathroom at the time. And of course I could have locked up the door and left the child in the bathroom all night, in the school all night. So I'd never leave that one down anyway. So be very careful of those things. They're just practical stuff. Risk assessment is called. Drop-off and collection times should be strictly adhered to. There should be adequate supervision of young people while they're waiting for class. A class register and incident book, I mentioned that earlier on, should be kept. In other words, a class register is very important. And the reason for that is, particularly in the summertime, and we're coming into summertime now when children, sometimes 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds, are dropped off and told to, you can go head down now to wherever the class is going on. And I'll collect you in at such and such a time. And suddenly Johnny and Mary don't appear at class. And the parents are wondering what's going on, maybe afterwards when somebody notices that Johnny and Mary didn't go to class, and they go to the teacher and they say, by the way, did Johnny and Mary go to the class last Tuesday? No, they didn't. And I have a note to that effect because we keep a register. So that's important too. Unknown to their parents, they probably took a little bit of time off to have a bit of fun. So there should be adequate supervision of young people while they're waiting for class, if that is the case of each branch. So that's a class register and incident book comes in handy. Record details of any incident occurring, date, time, place, and summary of the incident, okay? So Garda vetting, I'm going to try and get through this fairly quickly now. It's the sole responsibility of Comhaltas right now, okay? The Comhaltas authorised signatory is Tomás and Donegan, the deputy is Magella Bartley. what happens is that the first initial form, the application is called NVB1, National Vetting Bureau Form 1, is submitted by the applicant by post to me, okay? And when that is completed, they are issued a disclosure from the GNVB, the Garda National Vetting Bureau. Who should be vetted? DLPs, teachers, officers with access to children. And the Garda vetting form itself, how to fill it out, all sections should be completed in block capitals. It should be posted to Moss and Downing, and a copy of a photo ID. For example, it might be a copy of a driving license or passport or something of that nature. The writing should be clear and legible, especially in relation to an email address, and dates of birth. They should be absolutely spot on, because you need those two pieces of information to go online to complete the application, which is the next step. So once I enter the details and all the data of an applicant into what is called the e-vetting portal, the applicant gets an automatic email from the National Vetting Bureau giving them a 30-day window to go online with a link to complete the application. And when you're doing it online, what they need is further details, where the person lived from the time of birth until now, and the relevant dates in relation to those addresses. And then the disclosure comes to me. I'm the first to see the disclosure document. Disclosure document usually is a document that has come about as a result of a search done by the National Vetting Bureau on what they call their pulse system in relation to any convictions against that person's name in a court of law. And if a conviction comes as a disclosure on that disclosure document, if there is a note in relation to any conviction, I would have to make a very urgent decision and an appraisal of that in relation to allowing that person providing a service to children. And if it had child protection relevance, I would have no option but to tell the person that you can't provide a service in your branch, and I would have to tell the branch officers as well not to hire that person. Okay, so touch wood, we're doing very well. Out of maybe about 9,000 people vetted so far, I have never had to do that, so that's very good. Usually the disclosure document is a nil disclosure. Okay, so the benefits of Garda vetting procedures are as follows. They are a very good protection for children and vulnerable adults, obviously, because we have a search done on the people that do it. They provide a protection for Comhaltas members. It's a system that we can manage any risk in respect of former offenders, that we know we can get that done. It's one component part of what they call HR, or human resource recruitment, and it's a very good selection procedure that we employ as well. And it's also a key element of child protection and vulnerable adult protection systems adopted by the state. So in summary, here's we have a couple of bullet points: to create an awareness of child protection, adopt a child protection policy, and provide it to relevant branch personnel, appoint a DLP, carry out Garda vetting. Every 3 years, we talk about a 3-year cycle of Garda vetting. And I keep a database of the people that have been vetted, and after the 3 years, or when the 3 years is about to expire, they are given the option again. Personally, they get an email with the option to reapply for Garda vetting. We record in branch minute book that we have all these in place. We follow best practice, and we follow Comhaltas guidelines. And here's a couple of useful links for you there. The HSE Children website is simply hse.ie/children first, or the Child and Family Agency, tusla.ie, or the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, dcya.gov.ie. Okay, I'll leave those there for the moment if you're taking a note. They will be available anyway, because we are going to publish these. We're going to post these seminar documents to our website as well. So child protection is everybody's business. Remember, you can make a difference. Is fledgling, as Barack Obama said. Okay, and I have one final slide here training and support for DLP. One question that people will be asking. The e-learning program, 1.5 hours, e-learning program covers the following 4 things, okay?